Welcome everyone to our workshop today, Small Teaching and Information Literacy. Great to have you all here today. I'm really excited about this topic. Small Teaching is a book that has had a big influence on my teaching style. And so I hope that folks, especially those of you that are not familiar with it, will find it helpful as well. Before we jump into our content, I'd like to take just a minute to ask how everyone is doing today. If you feel comfortable sharing in the chat, you can go ahead and post, and I've given you some options from frustrated to excited to just a little bit meh, or maybe hungry or sleepy or relaxed. So if any of those align with how you're feeling today, you can go ahead and just post that in the chat. If you're feeling something else, you can feel free to add anything new in there that you wanted to post. And again, if you don't feel comfortable at all, you don't have to do that either. So it's up to you. But we'll give everyone just a few seconds to respond that would like to. So some responses coming in. May-ish accomplished. That's wonderful. It's great to hear. Sleepy and a bit meh. Always excited. Thank you, Kate. Feeling good. Thank you, Jean. Definitely meh. Yeah, it's kind of that kind of day, I think. Yeah, excited. 6 days until break. So relaxed, hungry, mish, meh. So some folks out there, meh. Few hungry people as well. So great to hear. Wonderful. So hopefully everyone will have a great presentation today, and maybe feel a little bit less meh afterwards. But if you still feel meh, that's understandable too. So we'll go ahead and do a quick little trivia activity to get us all engaged in thinking today. So I have some first lines from songs here. And you can go ahead and post if you know the song that the line comes from. You can go ahead and post that in the chat. So A is, at first I was afraid, I was petrified. B is, oh mama, I'm in fear for my life from the long arm of the law. C is 3:30 in the morning, not a soul in sight. City's looking like a ghost town on a moonlit summer night. D is, that's great, it starts with an earthquake. It's really hard not to sing these. E is, she's got a smile that it seems to me reminds me of childhood memories. And F is, I took my love and I took it down. So if you know the song that any of those lyrics come from, you can go ahead and post your response in the chat. And we'll give everyone a few seconds to think about those, answer any that you like, and then we'll go ahead and check and see what songs folks are thinking of. All right, so some responses that are coming in. Hi, Elizabeth. Responses that are coming in. So Mark says that F is landslide. And Hope says that E is sweet child of mine. Yep, absolutely. So we've got a couple correct answers right off the bat there. Megan has A, I will survive. Andrea also has I will survive. Yep. B is that one song by that one band. So let's see, Megan has B as Renegade, and Andrea also had that one as well. Yep, wonderful. Megan has C as The Thunder Rolls. Yep. And then for D, we have REM, It's the End of the World as We Know It. Yep. So let's see, I think we might have got them all. I think we did. Yeah. So wonderful. It looks like we all know our song titles. That's great. So yeah, so A was I Will Survive, Gloria Gaynor. B, Renegade by Styx. C, The Thunder Rolls by Garth Brooks. D, It's the End of the World by REM. E, Sweet Child of Mine by Guns N' Roses. And F by Landslide by Fleetwood Mac. Yes, all classics, Kate. It was great. It was actually really funny when I was going through. I had so much trouble picking the ones that I wanted to use because there were so many great first song titles, first lyrics that I just couldn't narrow it down. So I have even more choices than I normally have up here today because I wanted to use all of these. They're such great songs. Great. So thank you all for that. We'll go ahead then and actually jump into the workshop content. So what we're going to be doing today is looking at the small teaching approach that is outlined in a book called Small Teaching, Everyday Lessons from the Science of Learning by James Lang. And we'll think about how we can use the small teaching approach to help students engage with information literacy concepts. Quick participation guidelines for folks that may be attending their first workshop. You can have your camera on or off, that's up to you, but please do check and see that you are muted. Feel free to place any comments or questions in the chat as we're going through, and I will pause throughout to take a look at those and I will respond. If you would like to, if you'd like to access the handout for today, you can access that at go.osu.edu AU21 small teach, and I will put the link to that in the chat as well. So if you access that handout, you'll find that has a link to the presentation slides, that has information on the small teaching concepts that we're going to cover today, has information on the framework for information literacy, and then just a bunch of links to resources, activities, assignments that folks might find helpful as we're going through. I will share everything with everyone in an email at the end of the workshop as well, so don't feel that you need to be rushing to write down links or anything like that as we are going through. To get us started in thinking about small teaching, I have a quick poll that I'd like us to do, and we have two questions for that poll. The first one is how you would rate your familiarity with the small teaching concept. And the second one is how you would rate your familiarity with the small ball strategy in baseball. So I'm going to go ahead and launch that poll using a Zoom poll here. Poll 1, 2 questions, launch. We'll go ahead and launch that. So hopefully folks should now be seeing the poll and have a chance to participate. Question 1, how would you rate your familiarity with the small teaching concept? And question 2, how would you rate your familiarity with the small ball strategy in baseball? All right, we'll give it 10 more seconds for anyone else who would like to participate, and we'll go ahead and share those results. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll and share the results. Hopefully everyone is now seeing the responses. If you're not, you can go ahead and just let me know in the chat. So our first question, how would you rate your familiarity with the small teaching concept? We have a few folks that are familiar or somewhat familiar with the concept, but it looks like about half of the folks that responded aren't really familiar at all with the concept. And then for our second question, how would you rate your familiarity with the small ball strategy? We have a few folks that are very familiar with that or somewhat familiar with that. But again, looks like the majority of folks that responded aren't really familiar with that at all as well. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing here. Some of you might be asking, might be thinking to yourself, why is she asking us about baseball? And the reason I wanted to start with this question about baseball is this is actually how James Lang starts to talk about his idea for small teaching, is that he compares small teaching to the small ball strategy in baseball. And I admit that I'm not an expert on this, but my understanding of this strategy, and folks can fill in if those that are more familiar with it, basically in some baseball teams you have that go out and have a lot of really big hitters, home run hitters, and they score runs in bunches, and that's sort of their goal. They're going to get a 3-run home run, a 2-run home run, a grand slam. They're going to score a lot of runs and have those big hits and those really big moments, and they win games based on this strategy of having great power hitters. Some teams, however, have the strategy where their goal is basically to get on base, right? Get a runner on base, get a single, get a walk, however you can get on base, and then move those runners around by doing the little things. by doing a bunt or a sacrifice fly by stealing bases. And so scoring runs one at a time. So this is a strategy that is a little bit less exciting, right? You're not going to have that grand slam home run all the time, or you're not aiming for that, but it still can win games, right? And so this is the comparison that James Lang makes at the beginning of this book, Small Teaching, when he thinks about making big, massive changes to your course, as opposed to making small changes to the way that you teach, the way that you design your course, to the way that you communicate with your students, that could still have some improvement. So the basic philosophy behind the book is that incremental, small, little changes that you make can result in pedagogical improvement, can result in improved student learning. So this is an acknowledgement that we don't all have the ability to make massive changes to our courses. Many of us are teaching courses that were designed by other folks, or that have very specific learning outcomes or goals that we can't change. Or, you know, we are, if those of us that are librarians are often coming in as guest lecturers to courses where we don't really have control over the course content. And so this is an acknowledgement that there are still small things that you can do that don't require a complete course revision that still can support student learning. Let me go and check the chat. Kate shared, everything counts in small amounts. Yeah, that's a great quote. Thank you, Kate. Wonderful. So that's sort of the basic background of the small teaching philosophy. And so I'm going to go through and highlight some of the specific interventions that Lang calls out in his book. As you start to look at these, some of the things that you'll notice are that none of these are revolutionary, and many of these are things that you're probably already doing in some form or another. So you might be thinking, you know, what is unique or different about this? And it's really just, for me, was thinking about these together as strategies that were really intended to improve the way you teach, the way students learn, by doing these little things that many of us are already doing, but doing them in a very deliberate manner. Lang places his intervention into his different interventions into three broad categories of knowledge, understanding, and inspiration. And then he has different examples in each of those. We're going to go through, I'm not going to talk about all of these since I don't want to take too much time, but I'm going to highlight some of those that I think that work best, especially that you can do in one class session in 10 or 15 minutes. That can help to support student learning. And that could be really helpful, especially for those of us that may be librarians that only have that one class session that we work with students. But on the handout that I gave you all the link to, and I'll put that in the chat one more time in case anyone missed that one, I do outline all of the strategies that he mentioned in that handout. But we'll go through just a few of them today just to get an idea of what we're thinking with this small teaching strategy. The first is retrieving. So activities that you can do that force students to remember what they have been taught. And as the quote says here, if we want to remember something, we have to practice remembering it. And it seems very basic, but a lot of times I think, especially as we become more used to having so much information available to us at our fingertips, we don't often try to remember things anymore. And so what Lang really highlights there are, what are these things that we can do that force students to recall what they were taught the previous class, or to recall what they were taught earlier in the class, so that they can start to build the connections and practice retrieving that from their long-term memory. And as I was first reading this book, one of the things I tried to do, for example, is I was trying to remember whenever I would log into my library account, I couldn't remember what my number was, my account number. And so I put a little note, and every time I came into my office, it said, remember your number. And so I would see that and remember what my number was each time. And now it's been like more than a year since I've been in the office, but I still remember what the number is because I practiced it every day, remembering what that was. So kinds of activities that you can do that just force students to remember what they have been taught. Opening questions, just having that, you know, what did we cover last class? Closing questions. One of the things that Lang highlights, a lot of us use closing questions. We use like closing activities. And we do that as the very last thing in the class as students are leaving. So Lang really recommends making that the second to last activity so that you have time to review the students' responses and give some feedback rather than it's just something that they're doing as they're walking out the door. Quizzes, at the end of class, a little post test where students have to answer questions. Lang recommends, again, using short answer questions as opposed to multiple choice questions, although multiple choice questions can be helpful as well if that's that works with your teaching style and the content that you're teaching. So again, fairly basic, and you're probably already doing opening questions or closing questions or some form of these, but just thinking this is a really deliberate strategy where you're trying to require students to remember what they have been taught. The second strategy that Lang highlights is predicting. So requiring students to make some kind of prediction about what you're going to teach them. And there's a couple reasons why this might be really useful as tool that are highlighted. First, this forces students to dredge up anything that they can use that might help them to make a prediction. So any existing knowledge that they have, it kind of starts to activate that existing knowledge, and they have to use that if they're going to make a prediction. Another reason why Lang points out that having students make predictions could be helpful is that it might force students to acknowledge what they don't already know. And especially for those of us who are librarians, one of the things that we get a lot in our classes when we go in is students being like, I already know how to do all of this. I already know how to research. I had one library class when I was a freshman, and so I already know how to do all of this. And so there's sometimes a lot of resistance. So forcing students to acknowledge what they already know by asking them to make a prediction that turns out to be false or incorrect can help them to recognize, oh, maybe I don't really know everything. And then the other thing that Lang points out is that having students make predictions helps to indicate to them what you think is going to be important. So if you give them, for example, a pretest, and then they see that concept show up again later in the class, they might recognize, oh, that was on that pretest. This might be something that's really important for me to pay attention to. So examples of activities that you can do, again, pretest. It is important, Lang points out, to make sure that students know that it's okay if they don't know the answers. So if you are giving them a pretest on something that you haven't taught them, that they're not going to be punished for things that they shouldn't be expected to know yet. And then just quick ways that you can have students make informal predictions and right away give them feedback. An example of this could be in a class if you were showing students, for example, how to use a database, and you wanted to talk about how to add keywords in. You could say, I'm going to add an additional keyword in here. Based on this, do you think that my results, I'm going to get, greater number of results, or am I going to get fewer results, and why? And just sort of having them make that quick prediction. And then immediately showing them the response. The third category that Lang highlights is connecting. And this really emphasizes this idea that we learn things better the more things that we can connect it to that we already know. So if we can make those connections between our existing knowledge, strategies like just giving students time to write down everything that they know on a topic in advance before you start talking about it. An activity that we're going to talk about a little bit later on, but giving students 2 concepts or 2 terms and having them just write 1 sentence where they explain how those things are connected to each other. Lang, for example, teaches literature, and one of the things that he would do here is he would write a list of themes on the course, like love and power and other terms like that, and he would write the novels that they covered in class. And students would have to pick a novel and pick a theme and then explain what connection they saw between the novel and the theme in just 1 or 2 sentences. So anything that you can do to help students either make those connections between what they already know or to start forging those connections between the different things that you're trying to teach them. Concept maps is another example where they're trying to visualize those connections between what they are learning. Self-explaining. This really gets at this idea that it's really helpful for us if we explain what we are doing as we are doing it as a tool for thinking about our learning. A lot of the things that we do can be very automatic, and we may not even realize why we're doing that, or what we're thinking in that case. So having students take that moment to pause and say, this is what I would do here, or this is why I'm doing this here. This is helpful for them because it makes them to acknowledge, why it is that they're doing something, what they're drawing on that is leading them to do that. It allows you to hear what may be going wrong. We may have examples where we know students are getting something wrong, but we don't know what it is exactly that's leading them in the wrong direction. And so by hearing them explain what they're thinking, what they're doing, we can have that moment where we can provide feedback and explain, okay, this is what's causing you to go off in the wrong direction. Motivating. So obviously, and Lang acknowledges this, motivation is an incredibly complex topic. And it's not really something that you can necessarily do in one class session. I'm going to motivate students to love this topic. But he does highlight there may be things that you can do that engage students a little bit more, and just give them that little bit of, something that's going to get them interested in what you're talking about that day. And that might be enough to help sort of give them the motivation that they use to really apply themselves that day. So things like showing an image and having students discuss how, what they think about that image, and then how that might connect to the topic that day. Telling stories, if you're the type, especially that feels comfortable doing that, you could do that as well. So little things that you can do that can grab students' attention and just kind of generate a little bit of spark of interest in what you're talking about that day, and help them to start seeing why that might be important. Those are some of the examples that he kind of gives when we think about motivating. So those are the ones that I wanted to go over, of the ones that Lang highlights. Again, the rest of the concepts that he talks about, there are little descriptions of those on that handout if you wanted to take a look at that and see what those are as well. All right. So I'm going to pause here, and we're going to try a little strategy that Lang uses. Now that we've been over our concept, I wanted to give you all a chance to take a minute and write just a quick little summary of how you would describe the small teaching approach. Or you can say it out loud if it's something, if you want to tell it to your dog or your child or whoever is standing there with you, you can do that. So if you wanted to share that through chat and you feel comfortable doing that, you can go ahead and do that. If you would like to just think aloud to yourself what this is, but we'll let everyone have a minute to just think about how they would summarize this concept that we've been talking about. So we have a couple responses coming in. Oralea, apologies if I did not get that correct, has used multiple opportunities for students to practice what you're teaching. Yes, definitely. Kate shared, little changes in your teaching can greatly improve student engagement and learning. Yep. Hope shared, look for regular small ways to reinforce and practice material being learned. Definitely. Julie shared different types of learning check-ins for practice and reinforcement. Yes, absolutely. Jean shared a small change can go a long way. Absolutely, yes. So please feel free to go ahead and keep sharing those if you would like. But we'll go ahead and move forward here just to make sure we don't run out of time. I did want to give everyone a chance to share, in addition to any descriptions that they might have, if they have any questions at this time, any comments, Any examples where you've used one of the interventions that Lang describes, even if you didn't realize that you were using it. So if there's anything, thoughts, comments, questions that you would like to share here, we'll take a minute just to see what folks are thinking and feeling, and then we'll move on. Corey shared 1-minute papers. These can provide good feedback for the students and the teachers. Yes, that is a great example, Corey. 1-minute papers, so those quick that students write at the end of class, you know, what they learned or what they found important. Good feedback for you, good feedback for the students. And again, that would be something that Lang would recommend doing, that not as they're just walking out the door, but having it be right before, you know, that last activity, where you can review a few of their comments and respond to their comments so that they get a little feedback right away on what they wrote. Kate asked, does covering the what's in it for me count as a small approach? I don't think that Lang specifically mentions that, Kate, but I would think that that definitely aligns with what he's talking about, especially if we think about motivating. Part of motivating is just getting students' interest and helping them to see why something might be important. I can definitely see that as being aligned with this approach. Orlea shared concept maps at the end of the class over the material learned that morning. That's a great example as well. Wonderful. So we'll go ahead and move on, but if there is any questions or comments that come up, please go ahead and continue putting those in the chat. Just going to check and make sure where we're at here. How can we connect the small teaching approach to thinking about teaching information literacy? Again, let's do a really quick example here. I know that there are some folks that have been in one of my workshops before, and even if you haven't, you might already have some familiarity with the concept of information literacy. So I'd love it, anyone that feels comfortable in the chat, go ahead and write a quick definition of what information literacy means to you. Or if you wanted to indicate any of the core concepts from the framework for information literacy that you're familiar with, you can place those in the chat as well. So this is just a quick, what do you already know? What do you know about information literacy? If you feel comfortable, go ahead and just put that in the chat. If not, that's okay as well. And we'll just see what comes in, and then we'll move on. So a couple of responses that are coming in. Megan shared understanding how to find, access, evaluate, and use information for your own purposes. Hope shared knowing how and where to get good information and how to use it in academic work of some sort. I think those are both great definitions. Thank you. Kate shared you should consult a variety of reputable sources. Definitely a very important part of information literacy. Right, thank you for those definitions. Feel free to go ahead and add any more if you feel comfortable. This is the definition of information literacy that I have been working with, and this comes from the Framework for Information Literacy for Higher Education. And they describe information literacy as a set of integrated abilities, and this includes reflective discovery of information, the understanding of how information is produced and valued, and the use of information to create new knowledge and participate in communities. So that could be a discipline, a profession. Information literacy, in other words, is it's skills, but it's more than skills. It's also understandings about information, about how information is created and accessed and shared. And it's also habits of mind and ways of thinking that are required to really be able to effectively engage with information. So it's not just that you can search a database, although that's very important, but also that understanding of why you would want to search a database, of why the information in that might be different than the information that you could find using Google. So information literacy, this definition acknowledges, is more complex than just search skills, but it's also the things that you have to understand and the habits that you have to be able to be an effective researcher or to be effective in engaging with information. Folks that have been in one of my workshops before know that the framework for information literacy highlights core information literacy concepts. So basically tries to outline what are the things that experienced researchers understand about information, understand about scholarship, understand about the process of research that allows them to be more effective. So they highlight different core concepts, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time going through all of these, but just an example, this idea of authority is constructed and contextual. Experienced researchers understand that information sources have a variety of different levels of authority based on the expertise or the experience of the creator. And then they also understand that context means that certain types of sources may be appropriate in some situations, but not others, or in certain communities or certain disciplines. There may be certain types of sources that are considered more authoritative than other types of sources. Right? So it's not as simple as a student being able to look at a source and say, this is a good source or this is a bad source, but it's also that the student has to recognize within the context that they are using that information, what would be considered an appropriate source or not appropriate source to use. So a few of the other core concepts that we've talked about, this idea of research as inquiry. So recognizing this research is this ongoing and iterative process where you're not likely to find one very specific, clear answer. So this, I think, acknowledges the difference between searching and researching for information. Scholarship as conversation is one I like to highlight a lot. This recognition that within a discipline or within a profession, that folks are always talking to each other through their work, through their publications, through their research findings, and that they're engaged in this broader ongoing conversation within that discipline or in that field. And so having that understanding is really important for a student to know why we ask them to do something like do a literature review. Or why we emphasize citing sources so much, because we recognize and see citations as part of this process of being involved in this conversation that we are having with other scholars in our discipline or our field. When we think about this perspective of information literacy with this, that it's not only about skills, but it's also about habits, and it's about these broad conceptual understandings that we want students to develop. We think about how can we possibly teach this in a single class? And you can't, right? And the authors of the framework acknowledge this, that students are not expected to become information literate after a single class session or after one course, but that this is something that continues to develop over time. When we think about the reality of the situation that most of us are teaching in, I already mentioned this earlier, but a lot of us have very limited time with students. Even if we're teaching a full credit course, we still have limited time with students. Most of us have limited control over the curriculum, so we can't control what is being taught related to information literacy and the other courses in our curriculum. And we have other content to cover, right? Most of us are not teaching classes that are classes on information literacy. And even in the classes that we teach through the university libraries, that are basically information literacy classes, we still can't cover everything that we want to cover. So the reality is there's no way that we can make our students information literate in 10 minutes or 15 minutes. But are there certain ways that we could use this idea of small teaching to think about little activities, little things that we could do that could help students to engage with information, help students to start engaging with some of these concepts that we are talking about. And so that's what I wanted to talk about with this last part of the workshop, is thinking about some of these activities that we could do that might help students start engaging in some of these concepts. I'm just going to check the time real quick. Right. So I'll take a pause here though really quickly, give it 30 seconds or so just to see if there are any questions. If there are, you can go ahead and place those in the chat. Take a pause here before we move on to the activities. Don't see any questions coming in, so we will go ahead and move on. But if anything does come up, please go ahead and continue to post those in the chat. Let me see, something just did pop up. Kate shared, this is why I asked my instructors to model. Yes, modeling what the ways of thinking, the ways of practicing, the ways of acting is so important. Absolutely. Nice. For this example, we're going to do a quick poll here. I'm going to try to see if I can bring up a second poll. So what I would like you to do is, as you see this poll, think about if you were a nursing student and you had just been given an assignment where you had to go out and find multiple evidence-based articles that you could use to better understand a topic. And then you have to provide citations for all of those sources. If that was the assignment that you had to do, which database do you think would be most helpful for completing that assignment? And which citation style do you think that you would use for your citations? And it's okay if you're not sure, but just based on what you know, I recognize that most of you are not going to be nursing students, but just based on what you know, what do you think would be most helpful for completing this assignment, and what citation style would you use? Give everyone a few more seconds to participate, those that would like to. Okay, so 10 more seconds and I'll go ahead and end the poll and share the responses. All right, so I'll go ahead and share the results. Hopefully you all should be able to see those. For our first question, if we were doing an assignment where we had to go out and find evidence-based articles for our nursing class, which database would be most helpful? Looks like most folks selected CINAHL as the database that they thought would be most helpful. And then for citation style, looks like most folks, the majority of folks selected APA as the citation style that they found would be most helpful. We did have a few other answers in there as well. So those would probably be the answers that I would select as well, based on my experience working with nursing classes. That CINAHL would probably be the most appropriate database in that case, and that APA would probably be the citation style. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing now. So of course the object for that one is not really to identify what our knowledge of nursing is, since we know that most of us are not nursing students or not nursing instructors. But just to give that as an example of the type of activity that you could do that would start to help students either make predictions and also start to activate some of the prior knowledge that they have. So if you're giving a student research assignments, taking a little bit of time in class to identify the skills or knowledge that they have to have in order to be able to complete that assignment, and then giving them a quick pretest to see what they already know. And you can see most of us were able to identify the database that would be most effective. And that would something that students could do, whatever, you know, skills it is or whatever concepts that you want them to cover, having that pre-test as part of that when you're giving that research assignment to them, they start to recognize, oh, hey, they asked me about this question. I probably need to know that when I'm going to complete this assignment. It gives you a chance to identify what they don't already know. If everyone gets the wrong answer, you know, okay, might have to take some time to go over which database I want them to use. Okay. So that's just a quick example of something that you can do along with a research assignment where you just take that a little bit of time to identify what they know and to give them that feedback so that they can start activating their prior knowledge. Let's see, something came in the chat. Oh, Orlea shared your nursing professor. Hopefully those were the right answers. If not, you can feel free to go ahead and share that in the chat. So, all right. Other types of activities that you could do to help students start retrieving, all correct. Wonderful. Thank you. I'm glad that those were the correct answers. Other types of activities that you could do to help students start to activate their prior knowledge, start retrieving what they already remember about a topic or a concept. And these are types of activities that I've shared before, but I think can be really helpful. So doing pre-tests, true false pre-tests I find are really helpful, very simple. You can do them virtually, you can do them on paper, depending on what your situation is, you know, using polls, using Menti, but just getting those questions out there so students are starting to think through that, thinking about what they already know about the research assignment, the tools, the concepts that you want them to cover, having them write out definitions of things in advance before they learn about that. You know, what would you think that scholarship as conversation means? Even if they don't know it yet and you haven't talked about it, just giving them a chance to start thinking about what they think that might mean. And then that helps them to acknowledge, you know, that, okay, this is something that's important. We're going to talk about this. Think about what I already know. Another example of an activity that we could do here. So I'm going to try to do this really quickly. I'm going to have everyone watch this video. It's only a minute long, and then we will do a quick activity with this one. Let me just check the time real quick to make sure. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and watch this video. Hopefully everyone will be able to hear it.
Charlie received the grade for his first college research paper. He was disappointed. His professor was also disappointed, since so many students seemed to misunderstand the purpose of a research paper. As Charlie talked with his professor, they both began to realize that they thought about research in different ways. For Charlie, in high school, research had consisted of summarizing information he found on a topic and reporting it to his teacher. However, his professor explained that she considered research as inquiry. For her, research is a process focused on problems or questions in her discipline that are unresolved. This process involves steps such as identifying a gap in the literature, developing a research question, and then using an appropriate method to develop a potential answer to the question. Often, she explained, the answers created new questions. For Charlie, who was just starting his academic career, this view of research was at first difficult to understand. However, as Charlie advanced in his major, he learned to think about research as more of an open-ended exploration whose purpose was to answer questions and create new knowledge.
Okay, we've all had a chance now, just a very brief introduction to this concept of research as inquiry. So now we're going to do a quick activity. On the left-hand side, you should see some typical actions that students are expected to take as part of a research assignment. So identifying a research question, reviewing the literature, and providing citations. Based on that quick overview that we had of research as inquiry, take a minute to think of how you would create a connection between one of these actions and the concept. So just like a quick one-sentence definition of how reviewing the literature is related to the concept of research as inquiry. And just think about one short sentence that you could give that connects these two, this action that they have to do with this concept that we want you to understand. And if anyone feels comfortable sharing their sentences, you can add those into the chat. And so we'll give everyone a pause to think on this before we move on. So Madeline shared identifying what has already been done, but what outstanding questions exist. So identifying the gap. Brian shared need to identify holes in the existing body of knowledge that need filling. Absolutely. Megan shared identifying a research question is defining a direction for your research. Karen shared citations provide future readers with a roadmap of where to find more related information. Definitely. Orlea shared identify the evidence that is already there and the topic through reviewing the literature. Yes, right. So you can see really quickly with just a quick little example, we can get to students to start making those connections. So we might talk to students about research as inquiry, and we might say, oh, you have to do a research paper, but are they really connecting the concept with the actions that we want them to be taking? So this is an example of the minute thesis idea that James Lang describes, where it's just trying to really create the situation in which students are able to start making those connections that we want them to make. And obviously, students might need a little bit more with the idea of research as inquiry, especially if they're completely unfamiliar with it. But this is just an example of the type of activity that you could do where you start to get students to create those connections. And I think it's important to point out here, like that Lang mentions, we can't just, if we just tell them the connection, it's not as good as them thinking of the connection themselves. Right? So if you're interested in doing an activity like that, I have other versions of that you can link here. So one is focused on scholarship as conversation, if that's a concept that you're interested in, or information has value. So there's different versions of how you might do an assignment like this. But just think of, the concept that you want students to understand, or and how that connects to the actions that they have to do. Another example of an assignment, this could be something like, as you're giving students an assignment handout, similar to what we already did, giving them a list of terms or tasks or concepts that are indicated or highlighted in that assignment that you're having them do, and having them just write everything that they already know related to those tasks or that concept or those terms, or you could combine them. This is something that students could do individually, they could do in groups, where you're trying to just, again, activate that knowledge that they already have, identify what they already know, and have them think about, what they would do or what they already know. Have them describe how they would evaluate the source, why that they would take that particular direction. So starting to make those connections with that existing knowledge that they have. Right. As we give our students assignment handouts or instructions, going back to that several times throughout the semester and having students say, okay, we have this assignment that's due, you've known about it for a while, let's go back and look at that handout. How does what we talked about today connect to that handout? What did you learn today that's going to allow you to better complete this assignment? So Lang also recommends doing this with a syllabus, having students bring their syllabus to class several times and have them write down what they learned on different days as you go through the days of the syllabus, so that they're seeing the connections between what you're doing in one individual class and how that fits in the broader context of a bigger assignment that they're doing, or what you're trying to cover in the class as a whole. Sorry, my cat jumped up here. Watch out, Lucky. Self-explaining. Folks that have been in one of my workshops before probably recognize that I've shared self-explaining examples before, because I do find these really helpful. So if you're giving students some sort of research assignment or inquiry-based assignment where they have to go out and find information sources on a topic, have them draw out or depict in some way how they would go about doing that. What would be the first thing that they would do? Where would they go to get started? How would they determine what they're going to search for? Having them think through that process in advance and explain to you and explain to themselves, this is what I would do. So that they have to start thinking about the research process as something that requires critical thought. And it's not, they're going to go out and, the first thing that comes to mind when they sit down in front of the computer screen, that's what they're going to search for. But instead starting to think of this as a process that requires some forethought, and allowing you to see where they might need additional guidance. There's lots of different ways that you could do self-explaining activities, and I've given several examples here. I've mentioned before, we have our students create search screencasts where they talk through their search process, or they talk through their evaluation process of a source. They explain, here's where I'm going to go, or here's what I'm looking for on this source. This is why I think this source is credible or not credible. And one of the things we see a lot, we try to get our students to use lateral reading, where they go out and use other sources to evaluate a source that they're trying to look at. And we see evidence all the time that they're not doing that. So it's really helpful for us to give that feedback to say, this is what they're looking for, but it's not what we hope that they're looking for. So I'll take a pause here again. So see if there are any questions, and then I'm going to ask you all this question about, what do you think about roller coasters? Do you love roller coasters? Do you hate roller coasters? Do you fear them? What do you think about roller coasters? If you have any strong feelings either way about roller coasters, you can go ahead and share those in the chat. Corey shared, love the theme park kind, don't love the emotional kind. Oh, totally understand that. Megan loves them. Brian says the lines are too long. Karen says, not my cup of tea anymore. I feel the same way. I would probably just get sick if I tried to ride a roller coaster today. Can be fun if it's not too crazy, up and down. Sarah, hard pass. Jean, it can be fun. Yeah, great. So thank you. You might be thinking, well, why is she asking us about roller coasters at this stage? Then if we move on to the next slide, we think about, how do you think roller coasters relates to the research process? Anyone have any thoughts on how the connections that they can make between this idea or this image of the roller coaster and the process of research? And if you have any ideas, again, you can share those in the chat. Madeline shared twists and turns, not always a straight line. Jean shared the research process has ups and downs. Kate, the long climb up. Yeah, absolutely. Megan shared the end. Is it always clearly in sight from the beginning? I love that. Yes. Corey shared definitely has some ups and downs. Absolutely. So that's an example of just a really quick kind of activity that you could do to, again, help students to start making connections between their experience, but also just to get students engaged, right? If you were to do something at the beginning of a class and all you did was show students that image of a roller coaster and started talking about roller coasters, students who came in thinking, they might have their, interest in roller coasters, either their love or their hate or whatever strong emotion they have about roller coasters might be just enough to get them interested in that conversation as you move into thinking about describing the research process, if that's what you're planning on doing, right? If I came into a class and just said, today we're going to talk about the research process, students would probably tune out right away. But if we come in and start talking about roller coasters first, that might get their attention just enough to keep them engaged going forward through the rest of the session. So just a couple of examples there. Orlea, sometimes you're into it and learning a lot, and sometimes it's a hard climb that may not feel that interesting. Absolutely, yeah. Wonderful. So that is the end of my content for today. We actually have 4 minutes left, which is more than I normally have left. So if you have any thoughts or ideas on how you could apply anything that we talked about today, please feel free to share that in the chat. I did want to highlight just a few things. If you're interested in learning more about this, I did write an article on small teaching and the framework, information literacy framework. It's really aimed at librarians, but if other folks are interested in that as well, it's a fairly short article that might have some ideas for how you can think about teaching information literacy using this small teaching concept. If you're interested in any handouts on any of the core concepts, I have handouts for each of those core concepts available. And I did want to highlight just our remaining workshops in the series. Our next workshop next week is on open pedagogy and information literacy. I'm very excited about that. My colleague Amanda Larson will be co-presenting with me, and I know that I'm going to learn a lot in that workshop too. And then we have technology, pedagogy, and information literacy, and my colleague Hannah Primo will be presenting with me there. Also super excited about those. Both of those know so much about those topics, and I know that I'm going to learn a lot in those. And then our final workshop will be exploring social justice and information literacy. So if you're interested in any of those, go ahead and we'll send out the links to register afterwards. All right, so I am going to stop sharing and open it up for any last questions, comments, or thoughts. You can feel free to share in the chat, or if you would like to unmute yourself and talk, you can do that as well. So Karen shared in the chat, great food for thought. Thank you. Please share the article information. Yep, I will share the links to that with email with everyone. Corey, or let's see, Orlea shared planning my spring course now. This would be helpful. Wonderful. Thank you, Julie. Wonderful. So I'll continue to hang out in case we have any additional last questions, comments, or thoughts. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.